Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Basement Bible Study. I'm sorry it's been a couple weeks since I last recorded. We've been kind of busy with the kids, just finishing up school. We got birthday party tomorrow via Zoom, which is just weird, and getting some house projects done. It's been really nice to be able to meet with you guys in Zoom. But we're going to keep bringing you the Bible study on video for those who maybe can't make it or want to check back. This is the second time I've recorded it. There was a lot of paper noise or rustling around noise the last time, so you're going to see me looking off screen a lot so I can check my notes, but I'm trying to keep the paper away from the microphone so we can avoid that, and I can avoid having to record this for a third time, which would be great. This week we're going to look at chapter 5, verses 8 through 12 in Ecclesiastes. We're going to be discussing wealth and the corrupting and kind of some of the negative problems that can come from not wealth necessarily, but the love of money, the creating of or the making of wealth into an idol, which is what really is the problem. And we're going to look at a little bit about what not just Ecclesiastes has to say, but what the New Testament has to say, and talk about that a little bit. So without further ado, let's jump right in. And again, I apologize for looking off screen most of the time, but we'll try and get this done. So verses 8 and 9 to start us out. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. Now, I think it's pretty easy to pick up on the idea that there's some corruption going on in government here. He says, do not marvel. He's essentially saying this is not a new situation, or in the version I read, it's do not be amazed. In another version of the Bible, it's do not marvel. But do not be amazed. Don't be surprised. Israel, at this point in history, has been conquered and ruled by other nations more than a few times. It is part of their, unfortunately, part of their heritage that they were taken over a number of times by oppressive nations. And really treated very, very poorly throughout history. And so this situation of corruption and officials, taking advantage is one that they certainly would have learned from other administrative systems or governments or whatever you'd want to call it. And it's no surprise, given the human heart, that they would tend toward having some corruption as well. And let's be honest, it's not something we don't see in our own societies today. So he's just saying, don't be amazed. Watching over high officials. Now, honestly, when I first read it, kind of quickly, I said, "Oh wow, they've got a check and balance system, and they're taking care of each other." But of course, that's not what's going on here. These higher officials that are watching over the higher and higher, and as it goes, are really just getting the back of the next person so they can get their graft off the top, So it is corruption, and it's going to the highest levels. This isn't something we should be surprised about. Verse 9 says, but this is gain for land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. I think, honestly, there's two ways you could read that. You could say the king relies on the fields just like the people do, and as such, he really should be above all the corruption, because generally, corruption does not make a system efficient. It generally bogs it down in silliness and nonsense. So maybe the king's above it all. Option 2 is that the king has a right to the product of the fields, and so this is a justification for the corruption. Kind of the idea being that, well, they're his fields, so he can do whatever he wants, and the officials acting in the king's name can do whatever they want. Unfortunately, I think, given Cola's style of writing and how he's looked at things before, it's probably the second one. It would be nice if it was the first one, but I think it's the second one. So why is Cola telling us not to be amazed? Why is he telling us about this? I think the point is that obviously he's not condoning or endorsing the behavior. More likely, he's trying to get people to not agonize over what they see. Now, obviously, they want to be upset, and if you can be an agent for change, then you should be. But if it dominates your life and really causes you anxiety and emotional pain and that kind of thing, then it's going too far. These are things that largely a society cannot change. These would not have been Western democracies where you can vote officials in or out of office. These were kings, and you didn't really get a choice. But the corrupt will be judged by God in the end. And we've seen that kind of refrain from Koheleth, in the past here. So faced with this powerful and corrupt government, what is one to do? I think Jesus gives us some help on this. And so if you'll bear with me, I'm going to find Mark 12 verses, I think we'll do 15 through 17 here. Oh, that's Luke. Hang on a second, sorry. This went smoother the first time, but then there was all that paper noise. So we're going to try it again. Mark 12, 16. Here we go. Okay. I'm actually going to back it up to 13 to give this some context. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius, and let me look at it. And they brought one, and he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. Now the Pharisees and Herodians here were trying to catch Jesus between a rock and a hard place, as it were. They want him to say, oh, yeah, no, you don't have to pay the taxes, it's not just, and it's a corrupt government, and all these things. But if you turn around and say, well, I'm not going to pay my taxes, you're going to get in a heck of a lot of trouble with the government. And Jesus knows they're trying to call him out. So he calls them out in their hypocrisy and says, look, the denarius belongs to the government, so give it to them. And I think Koheleth is kind of saying something similar here. He's saying, look, there's only so much you can do about the government, but in the end, God is going to judge everyone, and that is where the redemption will occur. And of course, looking to the New Testament, we know that no matter how bad it gets in life here, something much better is waiting for us on the other side. And I think you can draw some comfort from that. I think he's also saying, though, that government has to exist. People require government to a certain extent, and I know not everybody's going to agree with that, but that's my opinion. We are by nature sinful people, and as such, we need something that not only sets boundaries, but also provides for the common good. And I think both Koheleth and Jesus would acknowledge that to a point, government is an important part of our lives. Now, of course, it doesn't overrule God's law. And that brings me to the next part of the gospel, which is in Luke, that I wanted to look at. This is Luke 19, verses 1 through 10. And it goes like this. This is the story of Jesus and Zacchaeus. He entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." So the story shows that having a growing, healthy relationship with Jesus doesn't allow for the kind of corruption that Koheleth is lamenting. The two just aren't compatible. Now, that doesn't mean we're perfect, but that as we grow in faith, we should also learn that faith is not compatible with greed and corruption. Now, in the video, I think before this one, the last chapter, we discussed this relationship idea as well. And I discussed John Newton, who of course wrote Amazing Grace. In fact, I was so interested, I picked up his book. Of course, he's been dead for quite a long time, so he's not going to know about it. But I think the story of John Newton is interesting because he did something, he participated, he was a slave trader. He participated in something so obviously horrible and incomprehensibly bad, and then he changed his ways. He did that through a relationship with God. Now, I'm not in any way going to say that that justifies what he did. His final judgment is between him and God. But I think it shows the healing power of God. We see that in Zacchaeus. For Zacchaeus in the story, we see that it's an immediate change. But for John Newton, he was, I haven't read the whole book, but I know that he became a priest in, I believe, 1864, and didn't actually renounce or officially speak against the slave trade until, I believe, 1888. So it took 24 years. Now, I think we would all agree that was far too long. But the point is that a faith commitment drove him to realize how badly he was, how bad of a wretch he was. And I think that's the important thing that we're learning in the Jesus and Zacchaeus story. But as we read Koheleth in Ecclesiastes here, I think it's important to take that with us and understand that it's that relationship with God that is important. And to maybe let that drown out some of the noise that is around us, the corruption that we see, the things that make us unhappy here. We have to keep our eyes on the prize, as it was. I'm going on enough about that. I'm going to move on to verses 10 through 12, when we're really going to start talking about the emptiness of greed. Verse 10, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity." And I think this is a truth that we all know. And it's not just about money, but if you seek after something so much that it becomes an idol in your life, once you get it, you're not going to be satisfied. I certainly think we see this in the alcoholic or the drug addict. Once is never enough. One drink is not enough. There's always going to be a desire for more. And I think the same can be said with the idea of love of money. And I think that's what Koheleth here is trying to tell us. You're never going to have enough. Verse 11, "When goods increase, they increase who eat them, and what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes?" Again, it's continuing this idea that the more you have, the more you're going to want. You're never going to be satisfied. And with great wealth comes hassle. Property, goods, money, they all have to be managed. They all have to be maintained. It becomes, I suppose we'd all maybe like to try being burdened with this, but great wealth becomes a burden of its own. On top of that, you don't know who is your friend or what family members are really want to be your family members and who really want to be your friends. Because if you constantly are able to give them gifts and nice things, then you don't know if they're there for your money or because they actually value you as a person. And Proverbs 19:6-7 says this much better than I just did. It says, "Many entreat the favor of the nobility, and every man is a friend to one who gives gifts. All the brothers of the poor hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him?" And I think that kind of speaks for itself. You don't know who your friends are when you're rich. It's kind of like when you have a pickup truck. Everybody wants you to help move. Moving on from there, verse 12. Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. I think this is just another way of saying an honest day's work is satisfying. You can go to bed at night knowing you've done the honorable thing, you've worked hard, you've earned what you have. I think the full stomach of the rich not letting him sleep. I really think when we're looking at this, we're not necessarily talking just about somebody who is wealthy, but somebody who is wealthy through corruption, somebody who has hurt other people to get there. And one would hope that whatever hurt they've caused will give them some guilt, maybe some people more than others. But I think that's what Koleth is talking here, is that the rich will not be able to sleep comfortably in their wealth because they know they've hurt others and they have a guilty conscience. I guess I hope that's the case. Maybe not. Anyway, that's as far as we're going to go. I've rambled enough for you. I'm going to try and have a better recording device next week. I broke my iPad stand, and that's why you're seeing the computer moving around as I'm recording here. And hopefully we don't have the problem with the paper making noise again. So next week we'll start into verses 13 through the end of 5 if you want to read ahead. I'll get that recorded and onto YouTube pretty soon. Until then, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.